We've all been told that if you can't say something nice, don't say something at all. But sometimes life doesn't give you the option to not say anything. People are waiting to hear from you. Sarita Maybin's book is called, If You Can't Say Something Nice, What Do You Say? And she's my guest today on Full Speech Ahead, so stay tuned.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. We've got to take the neighborhood back.
So my children will not be afraid to say the word AIDS when I am gone.
Each one of you has your own platform. Mine is a stage in a studio. Yours is wherever you are.
Welcome to Full Speech Ahead, the program where we look at communication in all its many facets with an emphasis on the spoken word. I'm your host, public speaking coach Milo Shapiro from publicdynamics.com. Before we get to this week's guest, let's do our tip of the week. Back in the olden days of public speaking, the training tip you were given regarding the eye contact issue was to look past the back row of the group so that it looked like you were looking out to a sea of people and connecting with all of them. But as far as anyone in the last few years that I've spoken to has to agree on this, it just implies that you're not connected to anyone in the room. So what do you do with eye contact when you have more people there than you can connect with? Well, here's the advice. Make eye contact with one person at a time. Someone on the right, someone in the middle, someone to the left, and stay with them for 3 to 10 seconds. Now, some people might be afraid, well, won't this make everybody else feel left out? But no, it does the opposite, actually. When you connect specifically one-on-one with someone in the audience, other people around them, or who at least can see it from where they are, feel like you're connected to someone. And through that person, because they're part of the same group, you're more connected to them. So do a little bit of eye contact with everyone here and there instead of trying to scan the whole audience. And now, on with this week's interview. My guest today is Sarita Maybin, the author of the book and the associated keynote speech and training program, If You Can't Say Something Nice, What Do You Say? Her high-energy presentations provide practical approaches and positive phrases for those times when you need to say something not so nice. Sarita, welcome.
Thank you, Milo. It's good to be here.
I want to give my listeners a little background on you. As people who are doing motivational speaking, which I know you and I both do, we never really know when our audiences leave where we made an impact and where we didn't. And Sarita's been at this for quite a while, and she had a big impact on me. I, many years ago, was in the audience when Sarita was speaking, and people had told me that I should think about doing motivational speaking and getting in front of larger audiences than the ones I was working with in my team building programs. And Sarita got up and did something incredibly interactive. I didn't know you could do that in the keynote program. I thought, hey, if that's allowed, if she can get away with this and everyone seems to be loving her, then maybe I could do it too. So you kind of changed my life, Sarita. Thank you very much for that.
Wow, that's nice to know. Thanks, Milo.
So let's backtrack a little bit. How did this topic calling to you? What led you to speaking on this topic and writing about it?
It's interesting because I have, as you mentioned, I've been speaking for a while, for 19 years, and for most of that time, I have started almost every presentation with a phrase that my mother used to use, and it's the same one that you mentioned at the beginning of this radio program. It's if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And what's really funny is whether I'm in San Diego, California, or in Iceland at the Arctic Circle, anywhere in the world I've gone, all audiences know how to complete that phrase. And I'll say, if you can't say something nice, they say don't say anything at all. But what's interesting to me is at some point someone always would come up to me after my keynote or during a break in a workshop, and they'd say to me, well, Sarita, if you can't say something nice, what do you say? So the title of the book had been in my mind for many years because that was the exact wording of the question I got asked over and over. What do you say if you can't say anything nice? Because there are times, as you pointed out, when we might need to speak up. And so the title was out there, and I said, someday I'm going to write this book, and answer that question. And that's really what the book does. It gives you options for addressing some tough situations where you may have to say something that's not positive or nice. And the key is, how do you do that without ruining the relationship?
Sure. Is it the same skills if you're doing that with a friend as it is if you're doing it in a work environment or with a stranger, or is it different depending on who you're dealing with?
Oh, what a great question. That's a funny question because I always joke with my audiences that somebody told me years ago that home is where we go when we're tired of being nice. And I thought, isn't that a sad statement? We're on our best behavior for strangers and people at work, and then we're ugly and tactless at home. But I do think it is the same skill, and I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we can just say any old thing to people who know us. And so I really think that we should still stick with saving people's dignity, sharing our concerns without blaming, and doing things constructively, even with people we know.
And if we apply some of the things that you talk about at work, at home, we may end up with a happier home life as well. So let's take a look at some of the issues. Where do you draw the line between it's a confrontation and it's the beginning of a discussion? How do you know whether you should confront a situation or let it go?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
To confront or not to confront. That's the question.
And running away can sure be satisfying sometimes when you just don't want to deal with it, but that doesn't fix the problem.
It doesn't. And what's funny is one of the little story I tell at the beginning of my presentation, in fact, almost every presentation I do, I share the story about how I grew up as an Army brat, and my dad was in the military, so we moved a lot. And I always share that sometimes I leave people and I'd be sad, and other times I would leave people and I'd say, bye-bye, all too happy to be rid of them, only to find that when we moved, there they were at the next place. Or because a lot of people were on the same little circuit or went to the same bases, or there was someone just like them, like suspiciously similar, and I still had to confront the same issues. And so I always joke that, we can run, but we can't hide. Mm-hmm. At some point we're going to have to figure out how to confront. So the three things that I always suggest that people ask are, is the situation having some sort of negative impact? Is it affecting your attitude, the people around you? And then secondly, are you beginning to have a negative attitude as a result of them? And then thirdly, are you starting to build resentment? So in other words, there's a negativity that you're carrying around yourself, and every time you see them, it's just this negativity comes up every time you have to interact with them. So, but the main thing is, I always say that we have to take our ego out of it, and it's not about, well, I'm going to confront them because they're not doing it Sarita's way. I must show them the error of my ways. Because that's a lot of us. It's like ego. It's like they're doing it wrong. If they just do it the way I told them to do it, things would be great.
Sure.
So I always say that's not the variable. It's more about is it having a negative impact, and that applies to, is it having a negative impact on the family? Is it having a negative impact on the community, on the team at work, on the department? So on both personal and professional settings, we can ask that same, what's the negative impact, is the main question.
So if someone, let's go to the work setting, because that's kind of an easy one to look at, and let's go back to family or whatever from there and see how it applies. Let's say you have someone in the office who is problematic, and you're not the boss. In a way, it's easier if you're the boss because you're expected to speak to what comes up. But let's say it's a coworker. So now you don't have the authority to say, do it Sarita's way, or whoever's. Now you're just trying to make it a more peaceful work environment. Can you give an example of a situation where you've heard people talk about that rather than me making one up, and then how you might handle it?
That's a great question. In fact, a woman in one of my seminars asked me a $1 million question, which I think might have even later become a chapter title in some book. But she had asked, how do you pull rank when you have no rank to pull?
Yeah, that does sound good.
That is a great question, and I think I do have somewhere I've co-authored some book with that is the title. But it really is kind of like, when we were kids, we would try to tell people what to do, and they'd say, you're not the boss of me. So we are in a dilemma because many times the feedback we have to give is to people that we don't supervise, we're not the boss of. And one of the little strategies that I often recommend, I have a list of phrases. I love sharing phrases, and one of my favorite phrases, in fact, phrase number 5 on my top 10 list is, would you be willing to? And so when you put it in a question, it gives the other person the option of saying no.
And that takes some of the pain out of it, doesn't it? Because you're letting them know it is a request, it's not a demand. Right off the bat with a phrase like that, you can't seem too demanding.
Well, exactly, and certainly we really don't have the right to demand when we're talking to someone. In fact, I frankly think that even if we are the boss of someone, it works better to give them a chance to be part of the discussion rather than demanding and dictating. In fact, one of the things I often talk about is the fact that I'm the oldest of four, so I'm a bossy big sister by nature. And so when I was a young supervisor years ago when I worked in the university world, my dilemma was, how do I boss people around without appearing bossy? And one of the things I had learned somewhere along the way was the difference between the I and the you. And sometimes it's very tempting to say, you should do this, or you need to do that, or you better. And I always tell people, in fact, when I speak to groups, I have them put a circle around the word you and draw a diagonal line through it, like no smoking, no bare feet, no skateboarding, because the word you is normally
implied.
It's implied. It's a demanding, blaming kind of word. And so instead of saying you need to, you better, you will, I learned early on to be able to say, I would appreciate your doing this. I need this. I would like this. And then if you do want to give them a vote, you can go to a question, as I mentioned, and when you put you in a question, it's allowable. So would you be willing to, would you consider? What do you think about? Could you live with it if we did it this way?
I like the idea of the boss doing that too, partly because it's less threatening, and also it opens up the response to, I wouldn't be willing to because this is why, and it may give the boss more information than if it just gave a command. It might be that there's a solution that would come out of a discussion that starts with, would you be willing to, that would please both people instead of the person walking out of the office doing something that maybe he really knows isn't the best option, but he doesn't want to fight with the boss.
Well, exactly, and what's interesting too is a lot of times when I talk about setting boundaries and how do you say no nicely and some of those kind of things, I often talk about how it's a guilt-free yes, because when the boss asks you something, more than likely you will need to say yes, but you can do it guilt-free by setting boundaries. So, for example, you can say, if the boss says, would you be willing to, you can say, I would be happy to do that for you, wondering if it would be okay if I do it tomorrow morning instead of now. So you can say, I'd be willing to, and the boss gives you the door open to say, yes, I'd be willing to. But I think we always should say yes. Yes, I'd be willing to, and I'll do it tomorrow morning. Or is it all right if I get that to you at the end of the day? Or, yes, I'd be willing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, I'd be willing to. However, I'm wondering where it fits in the priorities of the other things that I'm working on for you.
There is that fine line between yes, yes and yes but that can affect how people hear it. A simple yes doesn't leave room for discussion, but that yes and versus yes but can kind of affect how it lands to the other person.
Yeah, and of course we all know that when you say but, it negates everything before it.
Right.
So although frankly I would rather have a yes but than a no, because no is the harshest of all. So sometimes to say, yes, but I wonder if it would be okay to do this tomorrow instead.
Right, that's a very minor but, so at least even though we didn't quite negate the first part, we just qualified it in a case like that.
Exactly. So back to this whole thing of asking for something when you're not the boss, when you say things like, would you be willing to, would it be possible to, would you consider, that does open up the conversation for the other person to set parameters or give conditions under which they would be willing to.
So long as their answer isn't just a no, that you said you didn't want that in the first place. Because when you get a no, you got another issue.
Well, and people always ask me that in my presentation. People say, well, what if they say, what if you give them a vote and they vote no? Because that's the whole point of using those open-ended kind of questions is to give the other person a vote. People say, well, what if they do say no? And I always say, I really do need your help, or I would really appreciate your thinking about it. So you can go back to your faithful I phrases. I really would appreciate your giving it some additional thought, or I really do need your help. Or how can we resolve this? If you're not able to do it, what are your suggestions? How might we resolve it? So it still takes you right back to questions when you get the no.
I want to look at how we can soften the impact of something negative when you have to tell someone. So we're going to talk about that right after this little 30-second break.
All right.
Got photos that need improvement? Freshen your photo. Old family shots that have gotten damaged? Freshen your photo. Want someone or something removed from a picture? Freshen your photo. At freshenyourphoto.com, we turn the pictures you have into the pictures you want. Add muscle, lose weight, lighten face lines, whiten teeth, fix darker off-color shots. See before and afters from dozens of happy customers at freshenyourphoto.com. That's freshenyourphoto.com. improveventure.com.
We're back with Sarita Maybin talking about her book, If You Can't Say Something Nice, What Do You Say? So sometimes it's not about confrontation. Sometimes it's about having to just tell someone something they don't really want to hear. What are some of the ways you can soften the sting of that?
Yes, isn't that the million-dollar question, Milo?
It's tough. There's a lot of million-dollar questions. I hope you're getting all these $1 million as you answer them.
That's great. One of the things that is one of the toughest things to do is to deliver bad news. And I always think that there's something called a buffer phrase, which is great to brace the person before you just leap right in. And buffer phrases would be things like, unfortunately I have some news that's difficult to share, or I have to tell you something that may be hard to hear. So it's always nice to say, is this a good time to talk? I have some important things I need to share with you. So
what does that accomplish for the person who's hearing it?
If the person that's hearing it then can kind of brace themselves, because I think all of us, when we're blindsided by something negative or some bad news, we don't take it as well as when we have a chance to say, okay, I'm ready. We've all heard the old expression, which almost has become cliche, when someone says, "Are you sitting down?"
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, but at least it prepares you for, oh no, what's coming, because that way you can steel yourself and be ready to be receptive to whatever is coming. But when you just get it like somebody smacks you upside the face without warning, it's a little harder to productively receive that.
Sure, I hear all of that, and I also think it lets the person on the receiving end know they have someone who's going to be sympathetic to them. This is not someone who just thinks, I'm going to drop this on you and I don't care, because they've already understand that it's bad news and that they're going to have an emotional reaction potentially. Exactly,
and that's my favorite counselor word, empathy. It shows that you do empathize with them, you feel their pain. So good point.
So now that we've set that up, is there anything in the wording of the news that you can do? Do you start to use some of the techniques you've talked about with the you and the I, or at that point is it just you just got to share the news?
Well, it certainly helps to share the news and be direct as opposed to beating around the bush. It's also helpful to state whatever the facts are, and it's not like there's anyone's fault or anyone did something wrong, but more, here's the situation. This has happened.
Stick to the facts.
Yeah, stick to facts. Here's the situation. And then it's also helpful to conclude that with, how can I help? What do you need from me? So once again, as you pointed out, you're showing that you're aligning yourself with them. You're sympathetic.
Okay, great. Another area here, opinions. Everyone's got them. Sometimes it's right to share them. Sometimes it's not. But sometimes it's asked of you. And we kind of come back to that, if you can't say something nice, what do you say? What do you do if someone asks your opinion and you really don't have anything good to say? I remember my last job, sometimes it was somebody just wanted to hear everyone was on board, and I didn't like the idea. So I was kind of stuck between being really honest or saying what they wanted to hear.
Right. Well, there's two different situations where you may be asked an opinion. One is truly they want your opinion. And I'll talk about that in a minute. However, the one that I find most tedious, for lack of a better word, is when there are people who are stirring the pot in the workplace especially, and they're creating negativity, and they're going around saying, what do you think about the new VP? What do you think about that new boss? I think that's, for me, a kind of a gossip monger who's trying to create negativity and get other people on board. And so I have three strategies for that person, and then I'll talk more about when your opinion really is requested. This gossip monger, there's three things that you can do. Number one, I would say there's three options. Number one is a non-response, which is just to say, you know what, I haven't even given it any thought. Or I've been too busy to think about it. What's that? That's safe.
What can they say if you haven't thought about it? There's not much they can do.
Well, and there's no further negativity for them to spread with your name attached, which is my fear. I don't want to get dragged into the fray. And then the second part is my favorite one, which is throw it back. Because if someone shares,
what do you think?
If someone asks your opinion, you can bet they have an opinion. So they say, well, what do you think of that new person? You can say, you know what do you think about them? And then they're off and running, talking about the person, and you're off the hook. Or better yet, combine one and two. I haven't even had time to think about it. What do you think?
It almost seems like that's safer to be able to combine them, because if you don't qualify that you haven't had a chance to think about it, they may feel like because you didn't object, you're on board with them. So
exactly.
To be able to say, I haven't thought about it, but thanks for sharing some of what you thought. Interesting.
Exactly, interesting. I always laugh about how as you know, my daughter's 20 and she's out of the nest on her own. But I remember during the teenage years, we had a little push-pull, but because I brainwashed her well with my strategies from the time she was 2, she started using them against me. So I remember one time I had asked her a simple question. I think I had a new outfit on or something, and I said, "What do you think of this new outfit?" And she looked at me with a total straight face and said, "Mom, the important thing is, what do you think of the new outfit?" I'm like, "Ooh."
What you were thinking is, I'm taking it off if you're asking it that way.
But I was thinking, stop using my stuff against me. But she got so good at using the strategies that I just thought, oh, this is sad. But it is sometimes best a lot of times it really does matter most what that person thinks. My opinion doesn't matter as much. It's what you think. But if someone does really want your opinion, as you alluded to, the third strategy is a great one, which is focus on the positive. Mm-hmm. And so if someone does say, well, what do you think of whatever, you can say, there may be 10 concerns and one thing that's great. You can say, you know what, I really like the fact that this will give us a chance to talk to more clients. Mm. And then you can go the next step and say, however, I am a little concerned about the resources we'll need to accomplish that. So in your case, you were talking about someone asked an opinion at work, they have a new project or some particular thing they want your views on. I think it's always nice to start with the positive and say, you know what, this really is a cool idea because it will accomplish blah, blah, and then go to, I do have one concern maybe you can address, which is how is this going to impact our budget, or how is this going to allow us to do whatever. So I think it's still kind of interesting because whether you're talking to the gossip monger or someone who really wants your opinion, option 3, focus on the positive, still serves us well.
It kind of reminds me of the old sandwich technique of including some positive with the negative so that it's easier to hear the negative. The old Toastmasters way of giving critique on anything, to find that something positive to say, but then to allow yourself to say that part. I do have this one concern about. At that point, you don't seem like the troublemaker. You seem like someone who's trying to be proactive. And, yeah.
Although let me say something about the sandwich. I always warn audiences about the sandwich technique. In fact, I have a whole thing on my handouts. There's a beware of the sandwich technique, and I always say beware only because it's a wonderful technique. But I always say that it's the only time you give positive feedback to your employees or to your colleagues is to then sandwich in some negative. Mm. People will always wait for the other shoe to drop when you give a compliment. So that's my only warning is your compliments lose their power if they're only given as a softener for a negative. So just to be cautious of that.
Yeah, at that point you probably got a lot of issues if the last thing you've ever said to anybody positive was only to set up a negative. So that person's probably got a lot more going on than just this one situation.
Exactly.
I'm curious if you get a gender difference on this. Do men react differently to being approached with these techniques than women, or react differently to trying to implement them than women? Because I don't know, at the risk of saying more than I should maybe, I have a feeling women are probably better at figuring out the tactful way of doing this, because I think there's a little more socialization around politeness when little girls are taught how to behave than with boys. Do you find that women adapt to what you're teaching more easily, or is it pretty even?
It's interesting because the problems, I should say the challenges, problems, whatever, of using these strategies between men and women are very different. With women, the challenge is to even say something in the first place. Oh, right. Like with women, because we are programmed to be nice and sweet, in fact, we're the biggest ones having been brainwashed of the if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So with women, the hardest part is just to be able to ramp up and say something. And with men, they just want to be blunt and direct and say, you better do your job. And so they have to backtrack. And the perfect example of that is I actually got into, well, we won't call it a knockdown, drag-out battle, but I got into some lively banter with a man in one of my presentations. It was a supervisor presentation, and it was on how to deal with difficult employees. Mm-hmm. or actually it was how to deal with problem employees and disciplining problem employees. And what was interesting was I was talking about the I-you distinction, how I works better than you, and you is a blaming word. And the man literally, leapt up and he goes, I'm not going to take responsibility for my employee. If he's not doing his job, I'm going to say, you better do your job. You better get it done. And this was his outburst. And so we had a little chat, and this was all, of course, a perfect role-play scenario for the audience's benefit, a little conversation in front of the audience. And we came to the conclusion he compromised. His compromise was he would say, he'd use the we-I kind of thing. He'd say, we are getting complaints from our customers. What can you do to help us fix that? And I thought that was a brilliant compromise because he acknowledged that the problem is we're all in this together, we're getting complaints from the customers. And then, instead of blaming, he put the ball in the other guy's court, the employee's court, and said, what are you willing to do, using the you word in a question, softened it, what are you willing to do to help us fix this? And that was where we left it. He said, okay, I can do that. That'll be a compromise. But he was really wanting to be direct, and he felt like he wanted to say, do better, you will, and demand. And we kind of came to a
it's just not as
compromise on
effective.
Exactly, because people will do it because they have to keep their jobs, but for people to just kind of comply with what you're doing doesn't really bring any full commitment or loyalty.
When we come back from this 30-second break, I want to ask you how we can stay calm during confrontational situations before we open our mouths and say something we regret. So we will be right back after this.
Not another boring conference.
Liven it up with IMPROVentures and the fun of improvisation. Check out motivational speeches and entertainment that get everyone learning through play and laughter. For smaller groups, Teamprovising is our teamwork and communication program with more feedback and fun, plus public dynamics, keynotes, training, and coaching on public speaking skills. You can be more effective in front of groups. Learn more today.
IMPROVentures, 619-542-0761, or see videos at IMPROVevents.com.
So, Sarita, sometimes we can feel the ball about to drop, especially if we get used to someone who uses techniques like your daughter who figured out, I'm catching myself in one of these moments here where confrontation could potentially come up. How do we stay calm and make sure that we're not reacting emotionally so that we use the steps appropriately?
I think a lot of times we are at a complete loss. The proverbial jaw is hanging open because we don't know what to say. And, I'm a big fan of, I spend a bit of time talking about this in my presentations, and I'm a big fan of take a deep breath before you speak.
Sometimes you have to schedule that.
Oh my gosh! Because a lot of times you're running frantically, and then you find yourself in this little encounter, and you're in the middle of a long to-do list, and you just really fly off the handle. So sometimes it's stopping to take a deep breath. But one of the things I think your listeners might appreciate is my 3 Ps, because the 3 Ps, I call it the 3 Ps for staying positive, and that includes being positive in a situation where there's about to be some negative news, or you can see there's a confrontation coming. But the first P is not taking it personally, just remembering that whatever this person is yelling about or upset about or in angst about is not something you should take personally. It's their concerns.
And that's a tough one because we're ready to take that on for ourselves. I'm always saying to my coaching clients, don't worry about making sure every person in the audience is happy, because you have no idea what's behind how they walked into the room. So the person might have gotten a very simple phone call and be flying off the handle because of a fight they had at home with their spouse. So not taking it personally is tough, but it's so important. You're right.
Second P is permanent, as in it's not permanent. This too shall pass.
Yeah.
And my mother was a wealth of wonderful wisdom, and she used to say, this too shall pass, and to realize that this situation that we're in right now, it's a tough conversation, or it's a tough situation that's going on, and maybe more than just a conversation, but that we'll get through it.
We've not taking it personally and remembering that it's not permanent. What's the last P?
And then last P is picture, as in big picture. Something's going to happen, and are you going to let it ruin your entire day?
My guest today has been Sarita Maybin. If you've been interested in the things she has to say and think her book, If You Can't Say Something Nice, What Do You Say? Might be good reading material for you. You can find that on her website, which is SaritaMaybin.com. And since that's an unusual name, I'm going to spell that. That's SARITA, last name MAYBIN.com.